In the heart of medieval Europe, there were no monsters in the forest, no wolves, no witches, only women. And if her hair burned red, they said she wasn't born of a woman. She was bound to a stake, judged by silence, consumed by fire, not for what she did, but for what she was. This is not folklore. This is history. And this is a story of the woman who was too bright to be forgiven. In the shadow of crumbling cathedrals and candlelit altars, a whisper ran like a fever across the damp stone streets of medieval Europe. It was not the sound of reason, nor the echo of divine scripture. It was older, deeper. It passed from the mouths of mothers to the ears of children, from monks' confessions to the blackened pages of forgotten scrolls. And it always began the same way. Beware the red-haired woman. She was not born. She was sent to be born with hair, the color of flame, was to walk beneath a curse, in lands ruled by salt and superstition, where reason bowed to myth and fire answered every question. The color red was not a gift, it was a verdict. Her hair, even in the low light of dusk, burned like copper struck by lightning. The midwife who pulled her from her mother's womb crossed herself 3 times before swaddling the infant in silence. Her father, a cooper with tired hands, dared not speak her name aloud for months. In the town of Vern, nestled among the marshes of the Low Countries, there lived a girl named. These women were said to shapeshift, to whisper to crows, to sleep with devils under the moon. Men stared too long. Women spat in her path. Children threw bones at her feet and ran. The parish priest, father, would pause during sermons when his eyes passed over her. Cattle gave birth to stillborns. Wells soured. A child vanished. And though no voice dared say it aloud at first, every gaze turned to, as though she interrupted the holy rhythm of his breath. The church at first dismissed them as dreams, nothing more. But dreams, repeated often enough, become fears. And fears, when clothed in robes, become law. A guide penned by men who believed they served God by naming his enemies. Within its pages, the red-haired woman was described in meticulous detail. Her habits, her seduction, her unnatural resistance to drowning. The logic was circular, the tone fevered, but in the frightened mind, it was scripture. They said Ezim, never cried as a baby. They said cats followed her home without reason. They said once, when she was 7, a bull broke free from the butcher's yard and ran through the crowd. He had halted before her like a beast before a queen. But what truly sealed her fate was not magic, it was memory. Across Europe, the red-haired woman haunted the margins of belief. They chained her not because she was strong, but because the ritual demanded it. Father visited her twice. The first time, he offered mercy if she confessed. The second time, he brought the Inquisitor. The Irish called her being she, a harbinger of death. In France, they whispered of Lorraine, the flame-eyed poisoner of aches. In German folktales, she was the witch who danced naked on the corpse of spring. To the church, she was no woman. She was a mark of crack in the divine order, an echo of Eve's first sin. In the canon, Episcopi, and ancient ecclesiastical text, there is mention of women who ride out with Diana by night, red of hair and wild of spirit. By the time was 15, her beauty had become a source of silent suffering. And then came the storm, a week of black skies, boiling winds, and dead birds falling like hail. Her mother wept by candlelight. Her father drank more than he spoke. Then one evening, the magistrate came, not with an army, but with a book. It was leather-bound, stiff with age, and bore a single word on its spine, Malleus the Hammer. The Malleus Maleficarum, a book, not a fiction, but instruction, was taken in the night, not screaming, not pleading, silent. Her cell was made of stone and smelled of rot. And on that second visit, he did not meet her eyes. They would not burn her yet, not before the tests, not before the signs, because fire was sacred. Fire was a verdict, not a tool. And the girl with hair like flame, she would have to prove she was made of it. There were no windows in the chamber, only smoke. The Inquisitor arrived with a morning fog, tall, faceless, beneath a hood the color of dried blood. His name was not spoken aloud. His presence was enough. Behind him walked two monks, their eyes downcast, their lips trembling with scripture. A third man brought the tools, iron tongues, thumb screws, a bronze scale, and a bowl of holy water. Sat at the center, still chained, still silent. She has not confessed, the younger monk whispered. Then we will ask her again, the Inquisitor replied. The questions began simply, as they always did. Do you dream of animals that speak? Have you lain with men who later grew sick? When did you first hear the voice in the wind? She answered nothing. But silence in these halls was not innocence. It was defiance, and defiance in the eyes of the church was proof. Witches were said to be unnaturally light because their souls was placed on the scale, one side bearing her body, the other weighted with the bones of a lamb and a bound copy of Psalms. So they brought forth the theory. Witches bore a devil-esque mark somewhere on the skin, an insensitive spot that did not bleed, did not feel. They found a freckle behind her ear. First, the weighing, a test as old as fear itself. She did not pass. Then came the needle test. Was bound at wrist and ankle, her red hair clinging to her shoulders like living flame. The townsfolk gathered not out of malice, but necessity. To refuse was to invite suspicion, and suspicion spread like plague. A long brass pin was drawn across her arms, her back, her scalp. They jabbed it. No blood came. The monks gasped, and the inquisitors smiled. But the most feared of all was the water. Shivering, coughing blood, her wrists torn raw from rope. The inquisitor visited once more. In the town square, a wooden platform had been built over the well. She was lowered into the well. If she sank, she was innocent but dead. If she floated, she was guilty and damned. She floated. The trial was not a process, it was a performance. Every question had one answer. Every answer. One punishment. The women crossed themselves. The men looked away. A widow who brewed her own medicine. A child born during an eclipse. A washerwoman whose blood didn't clot fast enough. Even the children were silent. By dusk, she was brought back to the cell. You do not have to burn, he said, almost gently. Only say the words, name the ones who taught you. The ones with red hair like yours. Of a field beyond the marsh, where poppies grew like fire against the green. She saw herself dancing barefoot, laughing, hair trailing behind her like a comet. Still, she remained silent, because knew something they did not. She knew the fire was coming either way. The church claimed to seek the truth, but in practice, it sought confirmation. And outside the walls of the cell, more red-haired girls were already being watched. It wasn't about her anymore. It never was. In the night dreamed of her mother, then the dream caught flame, and she awoke to the smell of oil. Dawn came cold, not the chill of nature, but the silence of expectation. A kind of stillness that only exists before execution when the world holds its breath, as if reluctant to witness what it is about to allow. The pyre had been prepared the night before. Oak logs, dry straw, and a frame of iron. At its center, a post darkened by the smoke of those who had come before. It stood in the market square, flanked by banners of the church and guarded by 4 men whose faces had forgotten what mercy looked like. Let them see it tread like flame, a final insult to modesty, to obedience. To not attend was to risk suspicion. To turn away was to invite the question, what do you have to hide? She was not gagged, either. Witches, they believed, lost their power once bound. Her silent now was no longer defiant. It was ritualism, who was led from her cell barefoot. Her hair had not been cut. That was deliberate. The crowd was already waiting. Mothers with children, shopkeepers, men with hands folded tight and eyes cast downward. A few came for most came for fear. Father read the charges, but even as the priest's voice echoed, another sound stirred. The dry flick of flint against steel. Sparks kindling. A whisper of fire licking toward her feet. For the practice of maleficium, for the seduction of men by unnatural means, for communion with spirits, and for bearing the mark of the enemy. Each word heavier than the last, each syllable nailing her to the stake more surely than the ropes ever could. The inquisitor stepped forward one final time. He did not speak. He simply looked at her not with hatred, but with something far worse. Conviction, a divine element that separated the sin from the soul. In burning her body, they believed they were setting her free. This was not vengeance. It was liturgy, because in his mind, he was not killing her. Smoke filled the lungs before pain reached the nerves. Then came the cracking of flesh, the curling of skin. The ropes burned through quickly, but she no longer moved. A sound escaped her lips, not a cry, but something low, mournful, like a forgotten him. He was saving her soul. As the fire rose, there was no scream. His hand trembled as he clutched his mother's cloak. A final defiance, a final flash, and someone gasped. Not at first. The first thing to go was breath. Long after the stake had cooled and the ashes were swept into the corners of a chapel floor, he would remember the red, the silent, The moment when the fire did not consume her but revealed her, the crowd turned away, not out of guilt, but because they believed this was necessary. Fire, to them, was purification. They did not burn out of cruelty. They burned her because they thought it was right. But a strange thing happened as the flames climbed. The wind shifted, and in that moment, her hair, though black and flared once more into a brilliant red. It was the kind of gas that lives on long after the flame dies. A child in the front row stared, eyes wide. She smiled. He whispered, "Nonsense," the mother replied. "It's just the fire." But the child would remember long after the town forgot her name. They thought they had burned a witch. What they burned was their own fear, and the fear did not die. It never does. Centuries passed. Stone by stone, the pyres crumbled. The stakes were pulled down. Laws were rewritten, softened, forgotten. The word witch faded from courtrooms and crept instead into stories told by candlelight. But what no one realized, what no one dared to say was this. The fire had moved. It no longer burned in the marketplace. Now it burned in minds. Phrenologists, men with rulers and skull charts, claimed that hair color indicated temperament, red hair, volatile, lustful, rebellious. A woman with red hair was said to have a surplus of bile, a disturbed womb, a natural tendency toward hysteria. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as science emerged from the long shadow of religion, it did not yet free the world from superstition, it simply disguised it. Medicine replaced magic but kept the fear. Midwives were replaced by male doctors. Herbs became dangerous. Intuition, a threat. The image of the red-haired woman once feared for her fire was now mocked, pitied, sexualized. She appeared in paintings with serpents. In literature, she was the temptress, the untrustworthy beauty, the wild one. Shakespeare's Rosalind, the scarlet temptress in French romance, the Irish banshee in English myth, and always alone. Her hair is red, like the devil's tongue. The women refused to feed her. I am afraid for her soul. In rural villages of Poland and Hungary, they were still called witchborn well into the 1800s. In parts of Scotland, midwives whispered old charms under their breath before touching a red-haired newborn. She was not wife, not mother, not saint. She was other. Society had changed its language, but not its lens. In Victorian England, girls born with red hair were often hidden from public view, sent to convents, or quietly married off. And in Germany, in the archives of war, there is a letter from 1812. A village priest writes, "A girl was born under the blood moon." This letter was written 300 years after red-haired women were branded with names, Ginger, Fire Witch, Hellmaid, but look closer. We still judge women who speak too boldly. We still fear what we cannot categorize. And we still punish what we do not understand, just not always with fire. In schoolyards, they were teased. In tabloids, in war propaganda posters, they were the enemy's seductress, stealing secrets with lipstick and lies. And still, the echo, even into the 20th century, the stigma clung like it was no longer called witchcraft. But the logic was the same. The red-haired woman was still too visible, too dangerous, too much. She was no longer tied to the stake. But she was still burning. And perhaps most chilling of all was how few questioned it, because every era finds its own flame. Today, we mock the past for its bonfires and blind zeal. Sometimes with silence, sometimes with shame, sometimes with forgetting. There is a strange thing about fire. It destroys, but it also preserves. Archaeologists will tell you. Wood rots, cloth decays, but ash tells stories. And deep within the burned layers of human memory, beneath the soot of centuries, something remains, sir. The red-haired woman, not as a person, not anymore, but as a shadow burned into the stone of our collective past. We find her everywhere, hidden, twisted, resurrected. She walks through Russian fairy tales as a stepmother with a fox's cunning. She sings in the lullabies of Brittany, where mothers hush their daughters from becoming too wild, too sharp, too red. She haunts folklore in Iceland, where red-haired midwives are said to glimpse death in dreams. She dances in painting. In Klimt's sketches, she reclines like sign-made silk. Even in modern film, she appears from Jessica Rabbit to Melisandre, from femme fatales to misunderstood. In Dante Gabriel Rossetti's canvases, she stares with serpent eyes, hair coiled like fire around her throat. The stereotype lives, but beneath it, buried like coal waiting for flame, lives the question, why did we create her? Why do we still fear her? Was it ever really about hair? Or was it something deeper, something older than doctrine, older than fire? The truth is, the red-haired woman was never truly real. She was a symbol, a canvas onto which society projected its unease. With female power, with deference, with the untamed, her uniqueness made her dangerous. Her silence, suspicion, her body, a battlefield in a world desperate for order. The woman who would not be talked to burned brighter than the rules written for her head to be turned into a cautionary tale. And so, history sharpened its knives, and the fire came. But here's the strange twist of fate. She survived. Not the others, but the idea, the fear that created her, could not kill her. Writers use red-haired heroines as metaphors for fire within. Activists reclaim the word, which not as insult, but as symbol of resistance. As Shadow walks beside every girl who's ever been called too loud, too bold, too different. In fact, the more they burned her, the stronger she became. Today, women dye their hair red to feel powerful, rebellious, visible. And though no one ties women to stakes anymore, the fire still smolders in bias, in ridicule, in the uneasy silence that follows when a woman refuses to bow. But the world is changing. Now, we tell her story not to accuse her, but to honor her, not as a witch, not as a victim, but as a mirror. Because in her fire, we see our fears. And in her ashes, maybe, just maybe, we find the courage to stop burning those we do not understand. And instead, begin to listen. Her name's gone, her ashes scattered, but the fire never left. Today, we no longer burn women for their hair, but the fear of difference still lingers, just wearing a newer face. If this story made you question what you thought you knew, if you still hear the drums of old justice echoing in today's world, then subscribe, because some stories aren't dead. They're just waiting for someone to finally tell them, right?